Welcome to Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, where we bring evidence, experience, and perspective to make sense of today's leading health challenges. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
Hey listeners, it's Lindsay Smith-Rogers, and today we turn to CRISPR, the technology for editing the gene code. Dr. Neil Baer is a lecturer on global health and social medicine at Harvard Medical School, an award-winning television producer, and editor of a new book from Johns Hopkins University Press called The Promise and Peril of CRISPR. He speaks to Dr. Josh Sharfstein about the full range of CRISPR, from curing sickle cell disease to making devastating bioweapons. Let's listen.
Dr. Neil Baer, thank you so much for joining me today on Public Health on Call to talk about this new book that you edited called The Promise and Peril of CRISPR. It's great to have you.
Great to be here. Thanks.
So I want to start with maybe the obvious question. Could you explain what this genetic technology CRISPR is?
Sure. Essentially, it's a cut and paste program or an editing device for editing cells as opposed to, say, words on your word processor. So if you make a mistake and you spell table T-A-B-E-L, you can either autocorrect it or in the past go back and take out the E and L and reverse it and type in L-E. Well, that's what CRISPR does. It homes in on a mutation, certain letters in the DNA, and it cuts them out with an enzyme and then replaces them and pastes them in to the correct sequence.
I mean, our genetic code is millions and millions of these essentially letters, different amino acids. And CRISPR allows you to go to one specific spot and make that change, just as precisely as going into the works of William Shakespeare and retyping a word.
Exactly. So you can cut out, say, the two letters A and T are reversed. You can cut out A and T and paste in T and A. And it can be designed to be exactly at that spot. And we've gotten much better at it so that we don't have any what we call off-target effects.
So let's talk about first the promise of CRISPR, and then we'll get to the peril. So this book has a number of essays talking about what CRISPR could accomplish for the world. What would some examples be?
CRISPR can and already has cured some really horrific diseases like sickle cell disease or beta thalassemia, which cause, particularly sickle cell, horrible pain, strokes in children. And it works. And we know it because it's already been done on several people. And it is a very intensive technique, but so far, people are living full lives without this terrible pain and suffering.
And it's not just those two diseases that potentially could benefit.
Correct. There are other diseases already, too, that are even rarer than sickle cell and beta thalassemia, affecting the eye and blindness. There's some protein folding diseases of the liver. CRISPR is fairly easy to deliver through the blood. That's why these blood diseases like sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia are more treatable than, say, cystic fibrosis or Duchenne's. It's still difficult to target lung cells or muscle cells, but they're getting there. And I think that will happen. So I'm very excited about the possibilities of curing diseases that cause so much pain and suffering.
That's a strong case for the promise. Let's turn to the peril. What keeps you up at night about CRISPR?
Rogue scientists using it to make viruses more transmissible. Certainly you can do that with other techniques, but CRISPR makes it easier. There are a lot of what we call fab labs or DIY labs where people are using CRISPR to make giant tree frogs that you can order online and make them, to make fluorescent yeast in beer. I'm not in favor of making giant tree frogs and having people experiment on living things to understand CRISPR, but that's happening. And that worries me because I don't know what's next after tree frogs. And also, I worry about enhancement. It's very difficult to enhance a person genetically because so many genes go into our musculature, our eye color. But there are certain mutations, for instance, pain, where we could mutate soldiers, let's say, to not feel pain. Reportedly, China and Russia are either thinking about this or doing it. We don't know, but that's certainly a possibility. So I really worry about what we call enhancement and also bioweapons.
What about applications of CRISPR with good intentions? Do you have any concerns that they could go awry?
Yes, it's a great question. That speaks to, say, malaria. There are ways to use CRISPR in gene drives invented by Kevin Esveld, a brilliant scientist at MIT, to make mosquitoes, Anopheles mosquitoes that carry malaria, infertile and potentially make those mosquitoes extinct. Malaria is a horrible disease. It kills thousands and thousands of people every year. There is suffering. I do worry about the ecological aspects. We can't predict what will happen if we extinguish mosquitoes. We can try to do it on islands. We can try to see, but I don't think we understand evolution well enough to know why these mosquitoes exist and what the consequences might be or the unintended consequences if we made them extinct. So that worries me a lot about going forward fast without knowing what the results might be.
And you're talking about a change that CRISPR could make essentially that would affect reproduction. That's also an issue for humans as well, isn't it?
Well, for humans, it's a little different from gene drives because you can only use gene drives in living beings or living animals that reproduce quickly, like mice or mosquitoes. It's been talked about for mice too with Lyme disease. But for human beings, I worry about it because, for instance, there are the special cases that we talk about in the book. And a lot of scientists love to talk about these special cases and say, what about a family where the parents are both deaf and they have a genetic deafness where their children will be deaf? Shouldn't they be allowed to use CRISPR to make their children hearing? And that is a very tough question because that's, again, the slippery slope. Okay, we could do that. It's rare. We could. We're not allowed to in the United States or really anywhere to do it. But Dr. He in China did do it with embryos. So then what's next? He did it. He mutated the receptor for HIV and the embryo split into twins. So once you start, and we have a really wonderful essay by Ben Hurlbut from the Arizona State University, and he argues once scientists start, it's really hard for the ethics to catch up. That worries me.
Let's talk about regulation, which I might just generally describe as how we try to get more of the promise and less of the peril. So how do we get more of the promise? How do we make sure that these treatments that could be just life-changing for people with severe disease are available to them?
Well, there are two things. One is we have to make sure that we're not causing any harm in doing the treatments. So it appears these people who have undergone CRISPR for sickle cell disease do not show any signs of harm, which is fantastic. So we have to make sure that we're not causing any additional harm to them. And then secondly is the case of cost. Right now, a child born in the United States who has sickle cell disease, and there are 200 to 250 children born in New York State every year with sickle cell disease. The average cost in treating them over their lifetime, which is a shortened lifetime, 42 years, is $1.6 million and $50,000 out of pocket. It costs, which is huge, it costs between $2.5 and $3 million right now to treat an individual with sickle cell disease. Everybody who's gotten it so far has gotten it for free because we're in the experimental phase 3.
Dr. Baer, you mean it would cost that much money for a cure using CRISPR?
Correct. Will insurance companies pay for it? If you look at cost benefit, which I always hate to do, because I don't think that that's really the issue for providing good health care. But 1.6 million that insurance companies typically pay, or Medicare pays, 2.5 to 3 million. What's going to be the incentive for insurance companies, or particularly Medicare and Medicaid, to pay for it?
What about on the peril side? There are some rules now that prohibit certain types of CRISPR, like designer babies. That's not allowed. What do you think needs to happen to address some of these other concerns, like people who get started on tree frogs really go way down a path that we don't want them to go to?
Yes, or doing it on themselves. People have gone online and done it on themselves with not good results. Well, this is your area, Josh, because we really don't have oversight. And so scientists, geneticists, researchers buy pieces of DNA from companies. Companies have agreed that make these sequences to monitor to whom they're selling these. And so, for instance, if some researcher is buying pieces that we know kind of look like smallpox or Ebola, there are ways to stop that because we know what they're ordering. We know the sequence of all of these terrible viruses. We could not sell them, and these companies have agreed to do that, but there's no law forcing them to really not sell certain things. Josh, have you heard any politician ever talk about CRISPR? No.
I don't think I have, no.
No. We talk about AI, and I think we should. We talk about climate change. We talk about nuclear weapons. We talk about nuclear war, but we don't talk about the other thing, which is CRISPR. And so I think we have to have conversations, not just amongst politicians, but amongst junior high school students, and all of us to understand the implications of the future, and so that we can have our legislators responsibly pass laws that oversee the use. I've had conversations with very famous geneticists who've won many awards tell me that they think that scientists themselves can monitor themselves, and that there would be no pariahs because the force on them would be so bad that they wouldn't do it. And it's like, well, Dr. Hood did it. And in our book, Ben Hurlbut says that he was at meetings where Dr. Hurlbut was encouraged by American scientists to do what he did. So,
yeah, I thought one of the more interesting themes throughout the book is that this can't just be a technology that only scientists talk about and understand. There are real issues for civil society, democracy, our relationship to each other, and that really demand a broader public conversation.
Absolutely. How we do that is really a challenge, but it's something that we should discuss so that we have ways of doing it.
I think I would be committing podcaster malpractice if I didn't ask the following question to you, given your unbelievable career in producing television shows about medicine and science. How well do you think the culture side of the equation is handling CRISPR, and what would you like to see there?
I would like to see documentaries. I'd like to see conversations on news shows. I'd like to see TV shows. I did it on my show, Designated Survivor, which is on Netflix. I'd like to see it done responsibly and accurately. And that's so important because we know that what people see on shows like ER in the past that I worked on, or Grey's Anatomy, or any of the medical series that are on, that they believe what they see. And so it's important to be accurate. And we have mechanisms for that. Fortunately, the broadcasters ask for data when writers are doing medical series. And that's happened since ER because we don't want to put out inaccuracies, even though there still are some. So I think it's incumbent upon us to talk about CRISPR, not only from the scientific side to help young people understand it, and all people, but to talk about it from the ethical side. Like, what does it mean to be a human being? And what does it mean to change? If we have the ability to change ourselves genetically, should we be doing that?
I feel like it's important for politicians to talk about it, but it may also be more important for these conversations to happen in other spaces like the ones you're talking about.
Yes, like at Starbucks or anywhere where people talk.
Well, this book is really a very stimulating summary of these issues, some really interesting perspectives from different people on different dimensions of CRISPR. Congratulations for doing it, and thank you for joining me on Public Health on Call.
Thank you so much. It's been great chatting with you.
Public Health on Call is a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, produced by Joshua Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith-Rogers, Stephanie Desmond, and Grace Fernandez-Ciceri. Audio production by J.B. Arbogast, Holly Cardinale, Spencer Greer, Matthew Martin, and Philip Porter, with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Production management by Catherine Ricardo. Social media run by Grace Fernandez-Ciceri. Analytics by Eliza Rosen. If you have questions or ideas for us, please send us an email to publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes. Thank you for listening.